10 years ago, it felt like influencers were the laughingstock of the entertainment industry. Yet in 2025, we have creators launching full-blown TV shows, getting Grammy nominated as Best New Artists, hosting the Met Gala, going on stand-up comedy world tours. Heck, even this past week, the Golden Globes themselves had a Best Podcasting category for the first time ever. The entertainment industry is shifting, and people are starting to notice. Shows like Call Her Daddy or Joe Rogan have nearly 20 times the average viewership of primetime CNN. So they've attracted full-blown presidential candidates. Traditional media is changing. People are hungry for authenticity and people they can actually connect to. The days of having to fight for some approval of a random studio executive are gone, and the gatekeepers have the least amount of power they have ever had. We're in a world where anyone with an idea can build their own show. But how do they actually do it? What did these creators do to make it to Hollywood so differently from everyone else to get there? Well, that is exactly the question we set out to solve here today. And who better to ask than an expert in the space, Jordan Newman, head in content partnerships at Spotify, who oversees all of the amazing Spotify exclusive shows and have just spent years in the space. Jordan, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to Nicky at Night.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
First, I would love to I'm very interested in your take about this, because I think also this year has been probably one of the most explosive years of creators getting through. And I think what's fascinating is there are more ways to do it than ever, which is something I'm really interested to talk to you about. But before that, what does your team do at Spotify? When is something coming to your
Sure.
desk?
So my team really looks after our relationship with all of the creators and publishers and networks that are distributing podcast and video content on Spotify. So really working hand in hand with a whole wide range of partners to help them find success on Spotify, whatever that might mean to them, whether it's growing their audience, monetizing their content, using our tools and features, really finding ways to invest in our ecosystem on Spotify. So I have a team that works with creators of all shapes and sizes to really help them find success.
That's awesome. And I think specifically that is something I'll talk about a lot. Is this idea of IP development in the hands of the creative being the first time ever that has ever really happened. When you think about no actor owns the movie that they're in. No, a lot of artists don't own their masters or things like that. And through episodic content on the internet is the first time we're seeing creative control in the hands of the people in the thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, for the first time ever. So one is very cool that your team is entirely
listen,
around
it's a
facilitating
super
that.
exciting time to be a creator. I think you can get a lot of momentum and traction and own your audience in a way that previously has been very challenging for creative folks. So there's also challenges it presents. I think, being a creator and having to be responsible for growing your audience and monetizing your audience and not having sort of the same support structure can certainly pose a challenge, but definitely one of the upsides is being able to really own the relationship you have with creators for sure.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is prior to this year, we have seen people break through to entertainment just in a very different way. The great examples to me were a Quinta Brunson and an Issa Rae, right? Where people who started on early YouTube in the 2010s when YouTube was still a new platform, then had to completely stop creating content to write an entire screenplay, pitch it to 7 studios, and then eventually an ABC picks up a show for a Quinta. And that has kind of completely flipped when you think about this sort of new wave of talent, right? The people I think of are Benny Drama and Hannah Berner, Emma Chamberlain for a great example. Something we're seeing with the entire business model of entertainment has changed. Before, you used to have an idea, pitch the idea, it gets approved, and then they're we're going to spend money to market it and build an audience.
Yeah.
Whereas now you build the audience yourself first.
Yeah.
And then you're okay, this is what people like about me. How can I expand this thing?
Yep.
Is that the future of podcasting? You know what I mean? Or just creation as a whole? Is it everyone starting their own thing in this small scale?
I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. I think there's always going to be shows, on different networks or streaming services that are fronted by really creative people who rise to the top. And I think that's fantastic. But that said, I do think what's really unique about podcasts and this format in general is that you can really find a way to break through and build an audience, even if you're not the most famous person in the room.
Yeah.
And what's cool about it is if you look at the top podcasts, definitely some of them are fronted by big celebrities,
Right.
but most of them aren't. Most of them are people who, before doing the podcast, either weren't famous at all or were like maybe in the industry, but not like at the very top of the industry.
Right.
But they found a way to either create really unique content or to resonate with their audience in a way that is really incredible. And I think one of the common ingredients for success for podcast is that the audience has this parasocial relationship with the host, right?
Totally.
And I think that's something very unique to the podcast format versus like traditional media. And so if you're a podcast host, you have a relationship with your audience that I think is actually different from the relationship you would have if you were an actor in a TV show or even like even like a director or whatever. So I think that's another piece of it. It's both the ability to create that audience and create that content and get it in front of people, but I think the underlying relationship you're forming with the audience is also quite distinct.
And I think it boils down to companionship. Like that is really the most interesting thing to me about podcasting is it is the only medium people consume while they're doing something else. Like it is so I'll get episode comments on this show of
Totally.
like I listen while I'm at the gym.
100%.
I'm on my car ride home from work. I'm eating a meal while doing that. And I think that actually deepens the connection. Like it is the closest thing. One, I think in terms of just like raw authenticity, I guess, is like the closest thing you can get to like hanging out with somebody actually is seeing the way that they are in an hour-long dialogue of like and two, I think was one of the reasons like the medium blew up so much. Like it was very fascinating to me that like podcasting became the most popular it had ever been when short form video was also the most popular it had ever been.
I think the truth is like podcasts, it's an extremely long form medium.
Yeah.
You know, we've got top shows that are 3-4 hours long and people are listening or watching all of that.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I think it's because, to your point, like they're doing it while they're also doing other things. But I also think like, again, like part of the reason why people feel such a connection to these podcast hosts is because they're spending so much time with them each week and they're bringing them into their households. I think when we look at top shows that are really successful, what we find is that people are often doing sort of the same habits every week when they're listening. So everyone will, for example, like listen to the same show when they fold their laundries on Wednesdays or like the same show when they commute home on a Thursday. And so you're tying your media consumption, your podcast consumption to something you're doing in your everyday life over and over and over again. And I think that is sort of why podcasts are so powerful because people bring them into their everyday lives.
Yeah. And it's also like, I think this idea of like ritual is very important in a person's life, you know, like whether directly like known and stated, like I will fold my laundry on Wednesday while I listen to this thing, or just like, this is what I consume on my drive home from work when I'm thinking.
Totally. And it's like, have you ever like gone to do the thing, whether it's fold the laundry or drive home from work, and you check your podcast and that episode isn't there for some reason? It's like the worst feeling in the world. It's like, what is this? Like, what happened?
Totally.
You know, it's like the worst. And I think that's because you feel like, you're being stood up kind of, right? So I think like, it speaks to how ingrained this content is in people's lives.
Totally. And that was something that like, I really was shocked. Like when I started the show, like, and even to this day, like, it's so fascinating. Like, I could post the exact same episode on YouTube or Spotify. And on Spotify, the average watch time is 3 times as long as the exact same piece of content on YouTube.
Yeah. I think a couple of reasons for that I might call out. So one, when you're watching a podcast or even listening to a podcast on Spotify, you're not being confronted with like recommendations for 10 other shows.
Yeah.
We really try to get you to focus on the content that you're consuming. I think also people who come to Spotify really value the time there and feel like it's time well spent. Totally. And a lot of the content they're listening to is about enriching their lives. And I think that leads to people consuming a lot of that content. And yeah, I mean, I think one of the superpowers of Spotify is building engagement and really building a loyal audience. And that loyal audience tends to really want to get all of the content that their favorite creators are creating.
Yeah, and that's also like when I think about like the business of podcasting and why I think it is going to replace a lot of traditional media, which I'll talk about, is like exactly what you're talking about, this depth. Like I think it's so there's this like very weird thing with marketing where it's so quantitatively driven and people want X amount of views for Y amount of ad spend.
Yeah.
Yet there is no discussion of like depth of connection.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen is a real pivot to video for a lot of creators in the past year or so, more than a year, I should say. And I think one of the reasons for that is because the audience really wants to connect with these creators in another dimension. And on the creator side, they find that once they add that video component to their shows, they see all the numbers move in the right direction. But in particular, retention and watch time always, jump up. And that's because you're creating something that feels more engaging.
Yeah. And I also think it's like even encodes into memory deeper the more like experiences to your senses there are.
Yeah.
You see them, and again, like talking about that parasocial element almost, like even I think even like sometimes beautifully refreshing to see someone who's like they're filming in their bed and they haven't showered that.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And you're like
very authentic.
Yeah, like that's how I'm watching
Totally.
You know what I mean?
And like it doesn't mean you're looking at them 100% of the time. It's fine. It's a 3-hour episode,
right.
But I feel like there's so many podcast moments where it's like you want to see what's happening. You know what I mean? Like you want to see the expression or whatever it might be.
Totally. And that is also like a very stark thing. Like never in a million years would a news host go on the air.
Yeah.
Not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like not like that is this thing that I think is why people have gravitated towards it as a medium. Like this sort of even mess sometimes is appealing of like it I'm like that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think is
not
really,
right
really
now,
cool.
But in general, you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe right now. You don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
But with this too, like another thing I'd love to pick your brain about is for the first time in history, we're seeing traditional talent go the opposite direction, where now Amy Poehler is wanting to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Bowen Yang, Jason and Travis Kelce. Like that used to be creators. Creators couldn't get access to Hollywood, and that was the only thing they can do. And now this idea of like, wait, I'm an actor and I've never owned anything I've ever made.
Yeah.
And I want to have my own show now. Like, how has that experience been on Spotify?
So, yeah, I think to your point, super compelling for traditional talent to see this. Like, okay, cool. I have the ability to talk to my audience and reach them and then own that IP. That's obviously really attractive. What I think also, though, needs to be mentioned is creating a podcast is an enormous amount of work, as you well know.
Yeah.
And for a lot of these celebrities, there's other ways they can make money, easier ways for them to make money. And so I think, like, obviously there have been a lot of examples of big celebrities who've tried podcasting and decided that it sort of wasn't for them. And there are also examples of folks who've done it really successfully. And I think the ones who've done it successfully are the ones who really understand the amount of work required and are really doing it for the right reasons, which is trying to create content that really engages their audience in a way that no other sort of format can. So it's been wonderful to see. I think, again, it's, the content that still does the best is the content that engages people. And just because you're a big celebrity, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can pull back the curtain and be super raw and engaging. But I think if you look at the folks who've been successful, to your point, Amy Poehler or
the best,
the Kelce brothers, like there's something really compelling about both of them. They're both super raw and unfiltered. And you're really sort of getting the real. And both of them are doing an enormous amount of work for their content. They're releasing long form content every single week with a fair amount of prep on video. That is like a ton of work. So yeah, I give them a ton of kudos for that.
Yeah. How did it feel when Amy won the Golden Globe?
I mean, it was crazy. Like, I think just the fact that the Golden Globes recognize podcast as a format is so exciting. So many of the people who we work with have been doing this for years and years.
Yeah.
And I think like podcasting has such an undeniable cultural impact. But still, the idea that an award show like the Golden Globes recognized that and celebrated that, I felt like was a really big watershed moment for the industry. For, people who've been doing this for a long time, Spotify's been in the game for a while. There are
Yeah.
other folks who've been in it even longer than that. So it was super cool to see.
And I think it's also really beautiful that it's like highlighting the importance of like production quality. Is like there's like you can't get to a show like that without doing some of the amount of work that is required of TV shows. Like some of these people have producers and camera equipment and studio spaces.
Totally.
And, like,
There's, it's like, it's one of those things where there's a lot of ways to create a podcast. You can definitely have a really high glossy set and make it look super professional. And there's a lot of value to that. Also, you can do it in a way that feels more raw and unfiltered. And there's also value to that. It's a lot of work any which way you cut it.
Yeah.
It's not like one is, significantly harder, but yeah, it's a huge amount of work. I think like creating weekly content is really challenging. And that is, that I think the amount of work required there cannot be like undercounted.
Yeah, and that's I think what is cool about a show like the Golden Globes doing it. But I actually like I've only been doing the show for like a year, but I've like really fallen in love with this idea of, like you said, like doing something weekly.
Yeah.
Is like one, it's like very interesting to like it's like very therapeutic in a way to just be like you have to like talk
Totally
and fill a void of space
Yeah.
for an hour each week. And then also like I think it's very interesting to look at things that were significant to you a year ago and how much you were talking about something and be like, I don't think about this at all.
Yeah.
6
So
months
it's like
later.
a whole track record of what you've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's like
every
a
week.
video
It's like a
journal.
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I think, the other thing about podcasting that I like is this is long form too. And there's some things that you're going to say at like 45 minutes or 2 hours that you wouldn't say in the first like 5 or 10 minutes.
Totally.
So, yeah, I feel like a video journal is sort of the right way to put it too. It definitely feels like you're revealing something in a fun way.
Yeah, and that's why I think it feels very, very personal.
Yeah.
Something I'm really like I've talked about a lot on this show. I think I like made it in one of my predictions for this year was like how the business of the creator economy is changing. Like a stat I referenced is like TV ad spend has declined 28% in 10 years. 10% of that was just in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Yet it is still $58 billion a year. So when people talk about like this is a stat I always use when people are like the creator economy bubble. I'm like, I don't even think it's like started yet, right? Like these things like TV have had declining viewership for a decade. Then radio is another great example that is $28 billion a year of ad spend. Print media, $32 billion a year of ad spend. Like that inevitably, I think, has to go to something like this, right? Like it is episodic content that is there's a guaranteed host that's going to do some sort of ad read or something. And like, I also think it's way more targeted.
Yeah. I think there's a lot going for podcasts when it comes to advertising.
Yeah.
Obviously, like the idea of the host read ad is really compelling for brands because you have like someone advocating for your product in a way that feels really authentic. I also think that, there's like a lot of ways to integrate advertising in a way that feels authentic, whether it's like product placement or other ways to make it feel really positive versus interruptive. I think the challenge with the podcast industry has just been that historically the way that advertising has been sold is not in line with sort of how most folks are buying like modern digital media. And so there's been a big effort across the industry for the past number of years to really modernize podcast advertising, to try to figure out how we align on standards, how we have the same metrics across different platforms. So I do think that there's a ton of upside here, but I also want to acknowledge there's still a lot of work to do on the advertising side. And even when we look at our roadmap on the advertising side, there's a lot that we're building that we're really excited about for this coming year. But a lot of it is designed to really try to unlock budgets from advertisers who want to spend on Spotify and spend in this category in the same way that they've spent in other categories too.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point, and I'm glad that you made it. But like specifically, what sort of changes do you feel like what is the roadblock from an advertiser perspective
from spending more?
Yeah, or what are they like? You're talking about difference in metrics and things.
Yeah, well, so I'll give you a couple just examples.
Sure.
I think one is, a lot of these advertisers want to spend in video versus just simply in audio.
Right.
That's just, some advertisers prefer sight, sound, and motion.
Yep.
And so the idea now that podcasts have a video component, I think actually unlocks a bunch of advertisers that
For sure.
previously maybe looked at this as more of like an experimental budget type
Yeah.
of thing. But that also means that, they want to serve video creative. They want video ads. A lot of podcast ads are audio only. And so how do the platforms allow for video advertising in a way that feels consistent with how these brands are buying on other platforms? There's a fair amount of work required there. When it comes to metrics, one of the great things about podcasts is you can get your podcast wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah.
But one of the challenge is that different platforms will measure differently.
Interesting.
Some platforms really focus on downloads as the metric of record. Other platforms like Spotify really focus on streams. And so what has to happen in the background is for creators or publishers or networks to reconcile a bunch of different metrics into something that they can present to an advertiser. And so I think that creates some friction for these brands that are just kind of looking to spend and get what they want to get. So I definitely think things are moving in the right direction. I'm with you.
I think so too.
We're seeing more advertisers come into the space, spending bigger budgets and more integrated advertising. And at the same time, also we're seeing, for on the programmatic side, for the really like data-informed brands, more and more options to buy programmatically in the same way that they're buying from all the other sort of digital media platforms. So I think it's all moving in the right direction. But I think that there's been a lot of work to try and get us in this place where we're a really good alternative to budgets that were otherwise spent in other places.
Right. And like a very interesting thing about podcast advertising to me has been it's like the way I see it right now is it's a much smaller number of brands, but the brands that spend on podcasting really like they are all in on it. You know what I mean? And you'll see them across all the shows that you watch and blah, blah, blah. And I think what's so interesting to me is I'm like, they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't working.
Yeah. No, it's working. I think again, the host read ad is such a powerful ad format.
Yeah.
And I think for like a lot of these like direct to consumer brands and other brands that are really looking to get in front of folks, being able to associate your brand with a creator that people have this enormous amount of trust with is such a cool opportunity. And so valuable. And so I think when it comes to podcast advertising, some of the exciting things we're seeing are like really integrated advertising, product placement, branded segments, ways to make advertising feel like it's part of the content versus interruptive. Still clearly labeled as an ad, but done so in a way that I think really gives viewers more content.
Yeah, and doesn't disrupt the experience.
Yeah.
Something interesting, too, that I have found really fascinating is brands being willing to start their own podcasts now, which I think is like a great example to me has been HBO. Like for a lot of their big IP, they have like after the episode, this is a podcast where we're going to talk with this actor from the show.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why that works is because I think podcasting is a format that really appeals to super fans.
Yeah.
I think when we sort of look at loyal fans versus casual fans, loyal fans consume like 20 times more of an episode than casual fans, and they're far more likely to come back week after week. So for a lot of these media companies that are launching podcasts, it's really a way to engage the most loyal fans who are the ones that are coming back week after week, binging, blogging, whatever it might be about it. So it's definitely a smart strategy.
I love it. I think that is going to be a thing that completely explodes. I think film is like the perfect thing for that sort of format to experiment in, because I remember too, like they were so intentional about like the actor they chose to do that episode was someone who had a really impressive monologue, and they're sitting down and talking about the amount of takes it took to film it and stuff like that. And that I think also like what you said about superfans is why it is going to grow as a business and like an advertising format. I think to me, like what's so interesting about it is like you're not you don't just casually like the White Lotus if you're watching Carrie Coon
like
talk for 30
one of the biggest fans.
You are obsessed.
Yeah.
Like
and that's super valuable to HBO, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they want to nurture that audience and give them this shoulder content that they can really engage with.
Totally. And it's like long-term strategy, like that is an IP you get to build and own over time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can run ads or whatever for the new season, but then like those are disposable.
Yeah.
When the season's over, they're useless.
Yeah.
But if you've built this super fan podcast of people who are going to tune in because they love the series so much, then that becomes this thing you get to own and build until the end of time.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really, really, impressive thing. And I think some of the more legacy media brands have like really figured it out. Like New York Times, great example of like they are so all in on podcasting.
Totally.
What they done with the podcast and politics, like they have found ways to take the material that they're good at and adapting it into this format.
Yeah. And look, it's not easy. And so there's definitely some media companies that have done it better than others.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like the commonality, I think, again, is having these hosts or voices that people can really build a relationship with. And sometimes that's a challenge for a company, particularly like a more traditional company that's always like tried to keep a separation between the quote unquote creator and the audience in some way.
I think they used to view that as a liability when in actuality it's an asset.
Yeah, I think now it is. And look, I think also for a lot of like, if you're like a journalist at a traditional news organization, do you want to be in front of a camera every week talking about your content in a way that like is providing like opinions and off the cuff?
Right.
I don't think all of them would say yes, but again, I think like that is a valuable asset for a media company to create. And again, it means having a little bit of a different relationship with your audience than previously existed. It means creating a type of content that is new and unique. And so I think, there's brands that have really leaned into that and companies that have leaned in and have taken some big risks that have paid off.
Totally. And I think also we'll see more of these sort of like hybrid situations come. Like a great example is like Teffy and The Cut.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like she's talking about material on their O&O and they own it. But also like that gives the journalists some distance. There's also like an issue of safety with journalism of like a thing. You're like, maybe in my investigative journalism work about so-and-so company, right?
Yeah.
And that allows the creator to be the face of this thing and discuss it in a way that's like exciting to people without having to jeopardize what it is.
Totally.
And I think that is something that I like a lot more brands will tap into of finding ways to do that.
Yeah, I think like there is an audience out there that wants this content.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be really smart media companies that really lean in and try to capture that audience.
Yeah. And I mean, what's fascinating is Spotify is the front runner. Spotify has spent more than $10 billion on the industry of podcasting.
Yeah. So, when we sort of look back at the past 5 years and we looked at everything from our infrastructure to audience engagement to creator monetization and payouts, we estimate that it's about $10 billion, which is a lot. But, I think when it comes to our journey in podcasting, we really made a bunch of bets early that have paid off. And, we really focused on infrastructure initially. We purchased 2 awesome hosting platforms, Anchor, which is now Spotify for creators, and Megaphone. We worked really closely with a bunch of big creators. The Ringer, Bill Simmons company is the best example of that. And we really have tried to work with these creators and help them grow, for the past years and really trying to sort of fuel this industry. And so now I think what you're seeing is a lot of these creators have really broken through and become household names in a way that I think even a few years ago, you wouldn't believe would be possible. So it's been super awesome to sort of see the impact.
Totally. And also I think something that like when I remember that year when Spotify had announced that they were like doing that initial $1 billion of like when you bought Anchor and all the shows and IP and like something I think that people like that made the industry take podcasting seriously. Like this idea of somebody getting a multi-million-dollar show deal through podcasting like didn't feel real. Like it was like for 5 people. You know what I mean? And when Spotify did that, I think it made everybody wake up.
Yeah.
Of like, oh well, like this is a thing that has insane real investment behind it, and now we're feeling that pay off again, like Google
totally, and like also seeing other really big companies in this space, which is great. I think it's wonderful that there's a lot of investment happening. But I think like we really have believed in this space for a long time and believed in the opportunity for creators, for audience, and I think we're seeing a lot of those bets paying off, which is awesome.
Yeah. What is like a goal or like career dream you'd really love to do with something in the podcasting space?
I mean, I want to be on more podcasts like this.
Really?
This is so fun. Yeah, totally. Have me back on anytime.
I would love to.
No, look, I think one of the things that I really care about is how do we get some of the smaller podcasts to become bigger podcasts?
I'm glad
I think that's like a big discovery is traditionally one of the hardest
Yep.
challenges in the podcast space.
100%.
It's really hard. And so I think like finding ways to sort of help build that funnel for smaller podcasts to attract a bigger audience is something that I care about a lot, and acknowledge is really challenging. And
Yeah.
so we've done a lot of things to try and help creators and really try to build that cycle where you become bigger over time and you really sort of find your audience. But I think that's sort of the thing that we really care about.
Yeah, I have many thoughts about this. One though, I do commend you of like I feel like there was a time on the internet when everyone was like, we're gonna be like TikTok.
Yeah.
And they added Reels and YouTube Shorts, and
Yeah.
Pinterest was trying to make everything short form video. And I actually really commend Spotify for sticking to long form.
Yeah, no, I feel like when we look at our superpower, it's engagement and time spent on Spotify is so high that
Yeah.
it really always has made like we have this unique thing where people are willing to spend hours and hours and hours on Spotify listening to music, audiobooks, watching podcasts. So we really wanted to lean into that and find more ways for people to engage deeply.
Yeah, and it was I think it was an impressive decision because it was counterintuitive to where everybody thought the internet was going at the time.
Yeah.
But as we are years removed from that,
Yeah.
was it the right call?
Yeah, no,
You
I
know
think
what I
like
mean?
I
Like-
think we are all grateful that there is still like long form media. Like I think, yeah, like I said before, like I think there's something that happens in like the second hour of a conversation that doesn't happen, in the first hour. And even I think something you said before about sort of traditional media, even if you think about sort of the news space and you think about someone doing like a news hit for 5 minutes versus going on a podcast for 2 hours, like the depth of information that can be shared in 2 hours is just totally different. And so I think it allows for, one of the reasons why there's a lot of trust associated with this format is because you're having these long form conversations where you can communicate nuance and you can, have a discussion and go back and forth. And that's not always been possible with sort of more traditional media.
Yeah, and I think it's so important too to like we are as humans are visual creatures in more than just like making something look nice, but also
Yeah.
I think demeanor and body language and the way somebody engages with another person
Yeah.
is very like telling to who they are in a way that like you just feel like you know them more than any sort of other interview format will ever do. And I think that's why politicians really gravitated towards it.
Yeah, 2024 was the podcast election, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think like I commend a lot of the politicians that embraced podcasting because again, I think this is like a long form interview format.
Right.
It's not like a quick soundbite and it's pretty unfiltered as formats go. So not always the easiest thing for a politician that's trying to manage their sound bites, but I think allows for a more sort of authentic experience for the user.
Totally. And I think that with press and media, for a long time, there has always been this idea that like you do not engage with bad press.
Yeah.
You do not engage with press that is not already in line with the beliefs or value system that you have. And what's interesting with podcasts is it's actually had the opposite effect, right? Like you even like Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan and he's defending his position and his stance and what he thinks. And like, regardless of what you think of that, you can't deny that he clearly cares or is clearly knowledgeable about what his belief and like what he's advocating
And
for.
I think like inevitably, like, yeah, you're going to agree with some things and disagree with other things.
Right.
And it's really easy for that nuance to be lost in a 3-minute interview where, you really just get to the point. But in a 2.5-hour conversation, I think you can actually get to a level of detail where you can realize like, okay, this person is saying some things I agree with and they're really smart. And then I don't agree with all of these things, but that's normal. And that's how we should be having these conversations.
Yes, 100%. I remember randomly there was, I can't remember what podcast it was, but it was, I was watching a podcast that Zoran went on, Zoran Mandami, the mayor of New York. And somebody was asking him about one of his policies. I think it was about grocery stores and providing government-owned grocery stores. And they were like, they just asked and he gave his idea and they're like, well, what if it doesn't work? And he was like, And if it doesn't work, then I will stop it and try something new.
Yeah, totally.
And I had never heard a politician say that ever.
Yeah.
Of just like, this is my idea. This is why I think it will work. But if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
I will adapt and move on.
I think like, with podcasting, it's like the camera's rolling.
Yeah,
So like,
exactly.
you know what I mean? There's only so much you can
Exactly.
do to avoid a question. And again, it's like not a 3-minute news hit. Like a host can ask follow-up questions. And I also think like people know now that if they want to resonate on a podcast, you have to be like somewhat real and authentic.
Yeah.
Like you can't totally BS the audience, you know?
Yeah. And it ends up working even worse if you try.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? But I have an interesting thing too. Like something I also have found interesting about the like medium of podcasting is how it's really like spawned its entire genres of content.
Mhm.
Like the entire great example to me is true crime.
Yeah.
Like for some reason that is just it's
Yeah.
been an essential part of podcasting forever, and people love that sort of long form explanation. What sort of categories do you want to push? Like what are you really thinking is the future of conversations that are not being had on podcasts yet?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So true crime is a big one that's been super successful. I think that wellness is one that's been really big this past year.
Yeah.
A lot of big podcasts in sort of the broader health and wellness space. Everything from like science focused podcasts like, Andrew Huberman's podcast to more, less about health, like, Mel Robbins' podcast, even though she does speak about health sometimes. So I think that's one that we'll continue to see really big sort of moves in. I think one of the cool things about podcasts, so we've added this video component, and
Right.
for the most part, a lot of that video is talking head content right now, which makes sense. But I'm kind of curious to see what happens with video. Are there new types of video that become successful? Like, yeah, maybe it is like really high production, studios, or maybe it's like really low production, like direct to camera video journals.
Yeah.
But I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities that that video presents that weren't possible in audio. So yeah, curious to see what happens there. The only other thing that I would say is like we are starting to see a lot of content on Spotify that they probably don't define themselves as a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a creator like Nicky Giovanni that was producing has
YouTube.
content on other platforms. Yep. Mythical, etc. So, podcasts are great, wonderful, and work on Spotify. But I think we're starting to also see other types of content work too. Content that maybe still has some of the same hallmarks as a podcast, in that it's creator-driven, host-driven, released with a regular cadence. It's long form. It's not like 20 seconds.
Yep.
But I think we're just sort of scratching the surface to see like what kind of content might work that is not necessarily a podcast.
Yeah. And formats of viewing I think will be interesting. Like watching on your TV is like such a huge like I weirdly watch most podcasts on my TV.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty common for a lot of people. I mean, part of it also is if you're doing something else, like it's easy to have it on the big screen.
Yep. I want to circle back to something talking about like the growth of podcasts and smaller podcasts, because that I think is like the biggest barrier facing them right now. Is it's like the only medium where the entire basis of it is funneling an audience from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. What sort of ways have you been thinking about diagnosing and solving that problem?
So when it comes to audience growth, I think of it in like 2 steps. The first step is you have to be doing everything right with your show. And a couple of the things you need to be doing are releasing content consistently.
Yeah.
Like I said, you don't want to like stand up your audience and not have an episode drop when it should. And you really need to be listening to your audience. We've launched a bunch of engagement features like comments that allow for that 2-way conversation. We have a really powerful analytics platform that allows you to get some great data about what's working and what's not working. And so, you got to lean into what's working and avoid the things that aren't working. And you obviously have to like manage all your metadata. You have to have the show art, that feels right. You have to do your episode descriptions and your show descriptions, make it as descriptive as possible. So, I think once you have that foundation set, you're in a good spot. But obviously there's still a lot of work to do to actually grow that audience. A couple of things that we really focus on, I think cross promotion is still probably the best way to grow an audience. which is basically who are the other podcasts that are like you and how can you collaborate, whether that's like guesting on their show, doing some type of promotional swap where you give them some inventory and they give you some inventory and you can call each other out, or any other host of ways to work together.
Yeah.
That's a really tried and true way to grow and has been so for a long time. I think one of the great things about all of these short form social platforms is it does allow for you to get clips and put them out there and really raise awareness for your content. I still think you want people coming back to Spotify because that's where you're going to get that really highly retentive and loyal audience.
Yeah, the deepest
audience
connection.
But you can really get your content out there in a way that wasn't previously possible. And then, we work pretty hand in hand with creators to really help them understand where they are and how to get from point A to point B.
Right.
To really ensure that we're doing everything we can to sort of funnel audience to them in the right ways.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of fun sort of discovery features that we're working on right now. So definitely expect some big things later this year. But a lot of what we focus on is trying to help these creators lean in and find ways to grow their audience.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure. I know this is a tough question because I'm sure there's many things you can't talk about or share.
It's definitely like the number one question that creators have, which is how do I grow? And it's there's no one way to do it. I think it's about doing all of the things.
Right.
And really sort of putting yourself out there.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I'm very interested to see how the app itself changes to facilitate that. Because, I talk a lot about music on this show too.
Yeah.
And the more and more I've learned about the music industry, the more I've learned how important things like playlisting are.
Yeah.
And how much of a tool an amazing tool it is for Spotify to be able to highlight a new artist. You know what I mean? And I think as podcasting develops, sort of finding what is your version of that.
Yeah. And, awesome. There's a bunch of great places on Spotify where people are discovering podcasts.
Yeah.
And we're using sort of all the metadata that you guys provide to really get your podcast to the audience that we think is most likely to watch it. And so I think that's sort of another source of audience acquisition that people are really starting to see.
Yeah.
And in our analytics platform, you can sort of see the number of impressions that you're getting on Spotify and how that translates into actual listeners.
Yeah. That's really cool. I love that. Also, this is my pitch. This is my idea for you.
Please.
I want you to add a collaboration post feature, like what the other platforms have done.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Or it's like if I'm doing something with you have a podcast.
Totally.
Okay? That like exists on both feeds, I think is.
I'll take that back to the team. Like I said, the best way to grow your audience is through cross promotion.
Yeah.
So collaboration definitely feels like a.
And I think over time too, it's something even artists would value or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they're like this is all my press that I've done for this album, like on my Spotify.
One of the things we focused on is how do we make a creator's show page feel more customizable. And so you can add more than you've ever been able to add before. You can tell audiences the best episode to start with. You can point to other content on Spotify.
I love that stuff.
So definitely watch that space. I think being able to give creators more control over that is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, totally. I also have just a random sort of open-ended question for you. What sort of predictions do you have for the future of creators and entertainment?
That's a big question.
There's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, that's true. I think the trends that you identified are really going to accelerate for sure, which is I think that creators are going to increasingly want to own their IP and own the relationship that they have with their audience. And they'll want to find ways to activate that audience in new ways. So podcasting is hits a bunch of those things. It allows for you to speak to your audience week after week. It allows for them to, engage with you and really tune in the long run. I think we will see more focus on how to activate those super fans. And you're already seeing some of that. More creators are doing live tours.
I'm so glad you said that was going to be my next question.
They're going all around to talk to people face to face. Merch, we're seeing a lot of creators really grow their subscription offerings as well, putting content behind a paywall to really try to find ways to really monetize those super fans. So I think that's what we'll see more of. And then hopefully we just see a bunch of awesome podcasts happen. Like I think again, like the cool thing about the space is it's really hard to engineer success. The most successful podcasts are not generally the ones that were created in a boardroom, right? It was like a creator who just manages to resonate. But one of the byproducts of that is it's hard to predict success. Like you
Right.
don't know who's going to resonate, who's going to have a really big year. But chances are it's going to be someone you wouldn't expect.
Ooh, I like that. The touring thing is so fascinating to me. I
Yeah.
think that is really something that's gonna explode
Hmm.
and is integral. Like it's when I think about music, like it's so in person fan interaction is necessary for developing like real
Yeah.
community. It is a bedrock of the
Yeah.
thing, and that I think is something that's gonna be really, really and like I could scale. You know, like I like it. Are we gonna enter a time where a Call Her Daddy type podcast tour has an opener of
Hmm.
a smaller show
Yeah.
on the Unwell network? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
no,
that.
totally. I think like a lot of the bigger creators are really looking at these live shows as almost like events in and of themselves. They often have a brand sponsor they bring on board.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's music openers.
Yeah.
So, and if I don't know if you've ever been to one of them, it's like really fun. It's cool.
I haven't been to one yet, but I would love
Yeah,
to.
it's great. I was at Amy Poehler's live show right before the holidays. She interviewed Maya Rudolph on stage. It was like the best night. You know?
Yeah.
So
How
much fun.
how like was the energy of the room like feeling like an hour-long dialogue sitting there is
It's
so different
great.
than a concert.
Yeah, it's, I think again, like part of the funny thing about podcasts is you feel like you know these hosts, like even if you don't.
Right.
And so being able to see them in person and sort of have them invite you into their space feels like a very natural thing, actually, because you kind of feel like you've been doing it for, however long you've been watching the show.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then I think like my going off something that you just said too, like I think another fascinating thing about it is like we're also seeing this podcasting become this sort of metric used for other things in the field. Like the great example to me is like Caleb Heron having a comedy podcast, then like getting a stand-up special.
Right.
Like it's becoming the proof of concept. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if you can attract a large audience to your podcast, like that is a large, loyal audience. And I think that you can activate them in really unique ways. One way is by, getting people to tune into a comedy special. But I think there's probably a bunch of other ways. I mean, we've definitely seen a lot of creators launching brands, like products that they sell, that they feel like are authentic to who they are. And again, I think one of the reasons a bunch of them have been successful is because they have this audience that is tuning in, and they know that the problems that they're facing and trying to solve through a product are the same problems that their audience has. So I think we'll continue to see that happening for sure.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Jordan. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for
it was
having
so
me.
interesting to pick your brain about this.
Thanks so much.